Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Many times I'm covering games with armor-laden superhumans running around that are so badass they probably give confession in shifts, but not today. Today I'm covering a game about a common man with a common job who gets roped into investigating a series of murders, and to do so he dives into the seedier side of the social circus. One part black and white movie, one part taxicab confessions, and a little bit of Sherlock Holmes. That title is Nightcall. Nightcall has you driving people all over modern-day Paris at night as you solve crimes from the well-worn, possibly slightly infected driver's seat of a shift-shared taxicab. With an initial tenuous connection to the murders that happen in the city, an ear towards the ground, and a butt solidly in your mobile eavesdropping device, you piece together what may have happened and try to help the cops nab the culprit. Nightcall's out now for $19.99 on Steam, and let's see if this ride is actually worth taking. And as always, if you like the video, maybe go out there and find yourself a smaller YouTuber, somebody who's having difficult times in the demonetization, and hit the subscribe button. Make sure you click the notification bell so you can see what they have to offer. So here's my review for Nightcall, the world's first murderer's Pokédex, 4-wheeled therapy sessions, and absolutely baddest Santa. Graphics are up first. Push your systems this game will not. I mean, it's a graphical novel, it's got some elements mixed into it, so it's not even going to really prod most systems. Maybe just a gentle nudge if you're running a PC something like 3 generations back and also trying to run 4 games at the same time. Nightcall isn't about that. It's about eliciting an environment of comic book presentation with a very light sheen of simulation gameplay over the top. It really is more reflective of a crime scene black and white film. It feels bleached out with most of its colors, and there's a dreariness and mystery that envelopes practically everything you do, from deciding which fare to pick up next to trying to piece together a murder mystery that would make Columbo's "just one more thing" tagline become a hit single as it's repeated over and over and over and over again. That rough-hued comic book look and the choice of such low-color world sandwiches a title that has some incredibly adult subject matter in it that Nightcall dives into with both feet and maybe an arm or a leg that they cut off from someone else. The highlight, though, has to be the cast of 70-plus characters that you meet. Each one has a unique movement and style and design to them that lets each of them pop out from the back seat. With standouts like cosplayers with horns that have to watch out that they don't cut into your car's ceiling, to driven journalists who sit in the back of your car, old manning their way through life, just bitching about everything from youth to the environment, to at least a couple passengers who simply have to be top contenders in the butthole challenge, they're so stupid. And while the game doesn't really have you seeing that much more than the fare screen, some random locations you can visit, and the inevitable taxi cam, its choices work. For instance, when you drive around, the map above shows the sprawled out location with a comic book style scene actually playing out below it. This gives a nice visual style of time passing and informs the gamer. Also, I love the little camera cuts as you drive, trying to elicit a feel somewhat like Collateral. And the title's use of fake camera moments like zooming in on an airplane taken off from the local airport as some chatterbox tells you about the creepy thoughts he had about a maid reflects a world where taxi drivers inhabit hot mobile coffins with the creepiest of social funeral goers sitting in back. And I really enjoyed all this atmosphere, but Nightcall can be surprisingly lacking in the most important of areas. The game isn't very visually informative. It doesn't tell you the names of the people who want fares. You just see their faces, which then requires you to hit escape so you can go to your list of riders and see which ones are there, many times going back and forth a couple times before you can choose. The game should have had that menu system be easily accessed or had pop-ups on the clients. Also, the game's murder mystery board you have in your home to identify clues and possible suspects is nowhere near as engaging as it actually looks on first blush. It's basically just a giant board with a couple suspects that it looks like you glued all your fortune cookie fortunes to for no reason. Just one-liner sentences offering really the barest of clues. Also, the game could use some patches. There's some wonkiness when it comes to where the fonts are located and how they sort of appear depending on your resolution, despite a couple patches pre-launch. Also, the game will randomly stop drawing in your suspect page. And this can absolutely suck because as you continue, you're not going to want to waste a fare on Joe Bob, the resident paranoid homebody who probably goes out once a week to wash his balls in the local car wash. You want maybe the aristocrat with questionable ties to the group you're investigating. And the only way to fix this was actually to reload a save, possibly 2 or 3 times, or to reload the game. On reflection, it's actually easy to see what they were going for here, and there are parts of Nightcall that are very good, like the character design and the overall atmosphere, which is all parts dark and dreary, and 0 parts happy-go-lucky. And that sense of isolation while surrounded by people is perfect. It's just spot on. But it does need some interface fixes, some corrections to various UI elements, and maybe 1 or 2 bug passes. Until then, it's more Taxi with Jimmy Fallon than Collateral with Jamie Foxx. And next up, we're going to cover sound, music, and voice. And we're going to do voice first today? None. So let's move on. Sound. I think for what it's trying to hit, this is actually pretty good. It's a series of folks slamming their car doors and opening them, as well as ambient streetcar noise or the occasional sound of rain against a car as it slashes through a stormy night. What is here is lean but audibly interesting, and I think by its very structure that makes sense. It's not really going to have some profound sound palette. Taking all that into consideration, I think the sound was fine. And that brings us to music. There's a very real ethereal sonic vibe throughout all of Nightcall that I think really is excellent. A solitary confinement kind of soundtrack that plays out the barest of musical threads to add layers to the atmosphere that maybe the sound and graphics don't offer right away, which means it might quickly vacillate from plucking harps to a low transient synth in a short period of time depending on what you're doing, and that feeling of travel and loneliness is really heightened by excellent instrument choice, and what could have been a hodgepodge kind of track ends up sounding really solidified. Also, many of these tracks reflect a bit of the character that hops in. For example, the aristocratic character you meet is followed by choppy, quick string sections that feels like you've put your ear up against a ballroom door to listen to the music inside and can just hear little bits. As a package and where it counts, which is heightening the atmosphere, I think the music here is done really well. And that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. You start out the game choosing one of 3 crimes to investigate in a difficulty spectrum to the upcoming investigation itself. One thing to remember is that this is not 3 stories in a row. Each one is a remixing of the same world, with different people being the killer, which means there will be some repetition in some of the text that you read. Once you make those choices, you jump into the life of an immigrant in Paris with a clouded background that only becomes more questionable because somehow you're always the last person a serial killer tried to kill and lived through it. So of course you return to work and they're then blackmailed to investigate the crimes because somehow the cops have about as much sense as those people who think they're going to storm Area 51 without their lives choose your own adventure books ending on page 350 in the text "You're fucked" in bold lines. You jump in, Magnum PI the cab driver, you slip behind the wheel and quickly you're delivering fares to and fro in the nighttime city of Paris. The main activities including picking up fares, investigating clues, and going to the store for a quick chat, maybe some gasoline, and a newspaper. Fares are chosen by clicking a character portrait, while places to investigate are notated by an eye symbol. While locations can for sure pay off in hints and further story, it's the driving itself where most of the game is actually contained. Listening to conversations will have you sometimes involved in a back and forth with your writer, others will have you just eavesdrop and gather clues, while many are just going to have you scratching your head at the complete batshit menagerie and madness you're driving around town throughout the night, because if any one of us were a taxi cab driver for most of these people, I would assume you would just drive to the junkyard, politely walk to the back door, open it, and then toss them into the crushing pile. That is really where Nightcall works. The crazy characters. It's disjointed. You have these conversations, you're listening to them, talking to them, trying to figure out if you should just piss them off or not, make them happy, or just give them a false sympathetic ear. All of these things that you can do, each resulting in possibly getting information, which shows as a little folder icon on the screen when you get a new clue about the murders. And talking to them is actually quite enjoyable. Some of them you will already know prior to the game starting, and a little bit of world building and world history. Others you meet and somewhat befriend as you go on. Each time you drop someone off, there might be a little bit of narrative action you can take, and they pay you. And then you need to find the next job, with each action eating a bit of your time of the day away, which isn't always as easy as it may sound right here, because you might end up having to pass a sizable fare from someone you know has nothing more to offer on this particular crime for someone farther away with a smaller fare you haven't met before, and might be carrying just a bit of that juicy data clustered in the occasional dumps of narrative you get. Lastly, you have your murder dex or passadex. That lists every one of the characters that you can meet, what clues or info they've told you, as well as their major plot points. This helps to identify who you may want to drive around the city with and pick up as your time and money click down versus who you might just want to pass up. You can also read newspapers you buy or left for you by clumsy customers, as well as the occasional radio station to pick up a bit of news and sometimes a bit of hints. At the end of the day, the fares are calculated against what you've spent for equipment, vehicle maintenance, and other costs levied against you for a total. And if you drop into the negative, your game is over, and you have to either reload from your last save or start again. If you do make it, you end up driving home for the day. This is where you have your own crime board set up to track clues and possible criminals. However, this isn't really an interactive piece at all. The clues sort of auto-check and place themselves if they make sense to your current suspects, and if they don't, they're just sitting there to be piled away until something else you find out gives you more data, which is discussed with the cop, who calls you every couple days to pare down that suspect list. While this all may sound dry, and I'm not going to argue that it's not at times, Nightcall does have a number of inspired moments. First, the game pulls no punches politically. Instead, it's an entire title of microscopes pulled out into anonymous levels for you to peek into other people's lives, good and bad. This is easily exemplified by a number of times where one customer's rant is the next customer's rave. back and forth across social, political, religious, and scientific lines. While finding out what makes them tick, you talk to them and sometimes find out what makes you tick. I think this actually works great, especially at furthering the story and giving you some character development. It is a lens, though, to today, so there are a number of warnings about content for a reason. So when you jump in, don't expect everyone to be talking about watching reruns of Little House on the Prairie and dipping pickles and fucking ice cream, because PG this isn't. The game's 3 missions can take a varying amount of time, but it's not really an overly long game for most people. As a package, there's a lot to like here, but there's certainly a lot of oddities as well. And that brings us to fun factor. So I enjoyed meeting the characters for sure, but you do quickly realize, especially how the game is made, that 70 plus characters sounds like a lot at first if you gel with their stories, but it really isn't that many. There's a lot of repetitiveness, and because in one story a passenger might be guilty of weed whacking through a half dozen people with a poorly sharpened kitchen knife, that doesn't mean in another one they're not going to be completely innocent and not involved, but you'll be talking to them about the same things. And that sense of reset between missions really does end up pulling away from the feeling of shared and continued experience into something far more gamified than I think overall Nightcall was probably aiming for. It was fun at times, but it was also very cumbersome at others. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with deep sale replacing rent on PC titles. And I would say, despite it only being $20, this is definitely a title you were going to want to wait for a deep sale on. Maybe $5, maybe $10. It doesn't really offer a lot and is really cumbersome at times, and it really does depend on how much you're going to gel with those characters. Unfortunately, usually that gelling occurs in the first of the crimes you play, and the second and third times there is a hell of a lot of repeating, which really doesn't do the game any service. I did like elements like the music for sure, and the writing at times was good, though it could have used an editor here and there. I would have to say hold off or get this one a little cheaper than normal. So that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Reddit or Twitter or Facebook. You can see all those in my description. And of course, because of YouTube's massive demonetization, you can always help out by becoming a patron on the Patreon website. As you guys know, for every single review I do, I buy a copy of the game, even if the developer gives me a code. And being a patron always helps that. Besides that, we also have one of the coolest Discords on the planet. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.